Welcome to Building Transformations. I'm Tom Strong, President and CEO of Building Transformations and Principal at Wired Construction. Thank you so much for joining us. This is an interview series where we interview executives and leaders in our industry about innovation and technology, challenges in the market, and trends. Today, I'm really delighted to introduce Jas Saraw. Jas has worked in the industry for over 20 years. He interfaces with many executives across the industry. He is the Vice President of Procore Technologies, so one of the leading platforms in our construction market. Procore, if you're not familiar, I'd be surprised. They have 1.6 million users on their platform. They're in 125 different countries, and it's the operating system for construction companies. A really impressive project management system. Jas is the leader of the Canadian operations, and we had a wonderful conversation about trends in the market, some of the challenges that executives are facing, and really delighted to share this conversation with you. I want to welcome Jas Saraw, who is the Vice President of Canadian Operations for Procore. Jas has worked in the industry for a number of years, I think 18 years, in different sales capacities. He's helped to expand Procore across Canada and done really like an amazing, remarkable job at that, in that Procore has really become a dominant player in the Canadian market. If you're not familiar with Procore, Procore's a construction management tool. I hope I'm describing that correctly, but basically, it's a platform, it's the operating system for construction companies. They do all of their process management on it. All their project management, construction management processes live on the platform, and they're expanding that capability. They're touching on BIM. They're touching on a number of different things. It's a really exciting time for Procore, having gone public recently. And very happy to welcome Jas.
Thanks, Tom. Very nice to be here, and looking forward to the conversation. And you and I have, obviously talked about a lot of the topics that I think we're going to be covering today around innovation and the industry specifically. So just really looking forward to this opportunity. Thanks again.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for taking the time to join us. Really do appreciate it. Maybe we can start, maybe you can just kind of correct what I said about Procore and explain who Procore is and where you operate, and a sense of what the platform does.
Yeah, it's so Procore is actually, it's interesting. You asked the question, like, tell me a bit about the history of Procore or the background of Procore. And, in most companies that are in the construction tech space, you could probably answer that question pretty quickly. But Procore's been around for 20 years. So the story is a bit longer than most. And, this year actually marks our 20-year anniversary, which is very exciting for the business. Our founder and CEO, and still at the helm today, is a gentleman by the name of Tui Kortemanch. And so if you take it back to sort of the story of Procore, and this is important, right, is that, Tui was a apprentice carpenter. He was a journeyman carpenter in college, who then became a part-time real estate developer, moved into software, moved up into the Bay Area, and then close to the advent of Procore, a couple of years prior to, he came back to Santa Barbara, and the goal was to build a home with his wife and his young family. And at that time, as someone who had been in the trades as a younger man, he was like really blown away by the fact that there was so much inefficiency and so much, manual work and manual processes that were still ever present in construction and how that work got done. And so that sort of led him to think more about how do we build something specifically to solve for some of these issues. And so that's sort of the genesis of Procore 20 years ago. And so when looking at his own project on his house, he developed sort of an initial program. And the idea was to really create a collaborative platform that those trades could kind of work on and communicate with one another in real time, or about issues on site, kind of get them out of that manual paper-based process, get them out of the fax machines, and really bring them into the digital age. And that, I would say, suggest from that point to today, the mission's been very clear. It's been to connect everyone in construction on a global platform, because that is in itself just a microcosm of what I think a lot of folks feel today is still a very big issue in construction, and that is, how do we get folks to collaborate on the job site? How do we get real-time data into the hands of all of the stakeholders that are responsible for executing on a project? And then how do we make sense of that in order to drive accountability throughout the entire construction lifecycle? So that's sort of the genesis and the history. If you fast forward to about 2011 and 2012, that's when Procore really accelerated, at a breakneck speed. And a lot of that was driven by the advent of the Apple App Store. So giving companies like Procore the ability to publish applications that were mobile first and mobile ready to a mobile workforce. Let's be clear, this is a very mobile workforce. Was a big game changer. And obviously, that kind of stuff doesn't happen overnight. While today, 93% of workers on a job site have a mobile phone or a smartphone or some sort of smart connected device, 10 years ago, that wasn't the case. But that's sort of the trigger point, I think, in a lot of ways that really allowed Procore to accelerate and execute on its mission to serve construction globally and to improve the lives of everyone in construction.
Yeah, really, really amazing story. I mean, you've gone, I don't know how long it took, but you're up to like close to 2 million users, I think. You're in 125 different countries. Amazing growth story. I personally think that the big differentiator for Procore is the user experience. I mean, it's very intuitive. It's very fast to set up. People take to it very quickly. And I think that speaks to the success that you've had. So I'm just going to kind of shift a little bit. Maybe you can explain a little bit of your story. Like, how long have you been with the company, and what attracted you to work for Procore? How did that come to be? And you've been very personally successful with driving the growth in Canada. Maybe you can kind of talk a little bit about that story.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the question. And for me, it's an interesting one. I was, I think at the beginning you said I'd been in the industry for 18 years, and although we're not counting, it's 20 or 21 years now. So I've definitely been around the block. And at the time, this is about 5 years ago, I was just looking for something new, something different. And I was going through the interview process, being comfortable with technology, having worked with a number of technology firms over my 20 plus year career. I was really thinking like, what would be the next place to land? And, interviewing with a lot of the regular large established technology providers that you would expect. And then I just, got this call from a company, plucky startup in Santa Barbara with about 700 or 750 people. And I started talking to some of the senior execs at Procore. And it immediately sort of dawned on me that, this was an extremely culture-first organization. It was an organization that really lived their values. There was very little in the way of red tape that separated, the individuals from the executives. Strategy was shared freely up and down the organization so that everyone had a stake in the success of the company and could, impact change. And so for me, that was a really big differentiator. The other thing that was interesting, though, and sort of gave me a bit of pause was, when I first heard about construction technology, I really had to step back and go, well, is this really a thing? And I think a lot of people who are entering this space really have to do a double take because it's not the first thing that springs to mind. Now, if you're in construction, you know that we need technology and you know that the productivity rates for the industry are low, that we've got a big opportunity to improve efficiency and to reduce risk on the job site. But if you're coming from outside the industry, construction technology doesn't really roll off the tongue particularly well. So that's sort of how I took the job. It was really a leap of faith in some way. But now the last 5 years have really proven what a really good decision it was, what a fantastic company Procore is, but also how real the need is for massive innovation and massive change within one of the largest industries globally.
So that's a really good segue, actually. I wanted to ask you, in your career and working with Procore specifically, how are you finding the acceptance of technology in the construction market? I mean, your customers include some of the biggest contractors across Canada, but I would imagine you're also picking up and working with many trades and small to medium-sized enterprises. How are you finding the trend around the use of technology, introducing innovation on job sites? What are your thoughts around what executives should be thinking about when they go to choose a product? Maybe we can kind of expand on. You can kind of expand on that a little bit.
Yeah, it's a really good question, Tom, and I think you can go in a multitude of directions on this one. If I just go back to 5 years ago when we were trying to sell Procore to the Canadian market, there was a lot of resistance, and the resistance was around things like, as an estimator, I use Excel and it does everything I need. Once I've sort of created my initial budget, I pass it to the project teams, and then they use, maybe a bolt-on, project management light solution, which is tagged onto the legacy ERP. And so the resistance a lot of times was like, well, why do I need Procore? And so, if Excel does the job, and if I can, if I've been doing it the same way for the last 20 years, what's different now? And it's really interesting to see if you kind of go 5 years forward, how much that's changed. And you've seen organizations now much more readily adopting cloud technology. The conversation we have today, just to be very clear, is no longer, is it the time for cloud innovation or cloud technology or for a cloud platform? The question now is, how quickly can I deploy something like this in my business? How do I deploy it so that I can maintain relevancy within the industry and against my competitors? And how do I use it in order to drive efficiency and create better situations for the field teams and the back office teams with a consolidated platform? When I go back and I look at 5 years ago, even when we were getting some of those initial sort of words of resistance, some of the interesting personas that were pushing really hard for the technology were folks like superintendents on the job site. And if you really think about a superintendent's role, they're field-based, they're always on the job site, they're mobile, they're managing all the stakeholders in real time on a construction site. They understand that things can change like on a dime. Safety issues are super top of mind for a superintendent. And so that ability to keep a pulse on a job site, there's only so much you can do with Excel. So that was a really interesting persona, a group of folks who really gravitated towards Procore because they saw the value that something like that could bring, not only in consolidating and accumulating information in a digestible manner, where you could then derive insights from it, but also in the risk mitigation that they could drive through the ability to maintain a more consistent view of what was happening on the job site. Another group, and I'll just quickly throw this one out, that was resistant early on, were folks like the back office team. So think of finance primarily. And that was the group that was very focused on, hey, my ERP solution does X, why do I need Y? And what we've, I think, proven in the last 5 years is if you have a robust project management solution in the field with strong financial management capabilities, you can empower your construction teams to manage budgets in real time, manage pending change orders in real time, effectively manage risk as project managers on the job site, and relay that information in real time to the back office. And that was something that was traditionally not available to a lot of construction companies, and today is. And I think that has over time won over the back office and created that really seamless front to back office communication.
Yeah, I think I do believe that the whole industry is kind of woken up to the value of data and the value of collecting data and understanding it to analyze your own business. And Procore is a platform that definitely generates a lot of data and makes it accessible and enables a data strategy where you can measure your business more effectively. But as an organization, you're also collecting a lot of data from your 10,000 users, right? What is Procore doing with that information? How do you use data in your business? And is it, I mean, I've heard that some of that data is coming out now in reports where you can start to understand at a macro level cost and and the kind of flow of work across North America, for example, what regions are busy, et cetera. But is Procore developing, or do you have tools that utilize that data that you can give that information back to your clients, or they can tap into it to understand sort of macro level information on the entire market?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and a really good use case for this actually came up at the early days of the pandemic, and we're talking March, April, May of 2020. And this is, if you flash back, and sometimes it still feels like we're in the midst of the pandemic in a lot of ways, but that early period, March to April to May, there was a lot of uncertainty in the air. And so it gave us an ability to use the data in aggregate form to talk about things like, workforce hours, in the US specifically, states, and in Canada, provinces, where we were seeing rate rises or decreases in overall, work hours performed. And then we could use that as a barometer for how the economy was faring in each individual geography and locale, then serving that information up to the local and national associations so they could keep their membership bases more informed about that. So I think there's a lot of power for good that we can get from that technology in order to drive opportunities for associations to provide information that's meaningful to their membership, but also to lobby with government for additional funding or support in times where things are hard. In another way, we can also use data in aggregate to create situations that would improve the overall delivery of a construction job. So for example, if you're a general contractor and you've got 1, 2, 3 jobs on the go, the ability to take what we've learned through our artificial intelligence capabilities about a particular job site condition, and then serve up that information proactively in real time to a construction company to say, hey, what you're looking at right now might be a cause for alarm because we've seen safety incidents directly correlated to this type of activity. And we can serve that information up, somewhat proactively in order to effectively allow that organization to make real-time decisions about how to execute on a job, which situations to avoid and which situations to get ahead of. It could be a safety issue, it could be a change issue, right? It could be rework. So that type of level of artificial intelligence, and at a macro level, using the data that's sort of sitting in the background in order to make everybody in construction better and more efficient. And if you really look at the amount of rework that happens globally, I think the number is something ridiculous, like $500 billion. It might be more. But if we can even chip away at 1, 2, or 3% of that number, we've made some pretty impressive gains from an efficiency and productivity perspective. So I think the opportunity is really large to leverage data more effectively.
Yeah, I mean, my experience has been as a general contractor, and we live and breathe by budget, and therefore estimating and scheduling. Understanding how much things are going to cost and predict that, and that ties into really the performance of the trades ultimately who are actually going to execute the work that GC just orchestrates. So having access to the database, Procore's database, all the costs in aggregate, all the schedule durations in aggregate, that you can apply that during pre-construction. I just envision that would be so powerful as a means to get the most accurate budget and schedule out of the gate, and also understand who's performing in the market and also maybe who's available. I mean, potentially there's opportunities to capture available labor, just understanding the flow of work. I just want to spin wheels a little bit here, but from your perspective, I mean, you're interacting with senior people across the industry. What are the big challenges that they're talking about? Like, what's their day-to-day? We have to solve this problem. Like, what is the biggest problem that you continuously hear about?
It's an interesting question. Just going back like a half a step to what you just sort of referred to, which is schedule and labor. Labor is a very, very big issue. And so this sort of feeds into this question as well. What are people concerned about? I think the labor shortage, has been a topic that's been top of mind for 5 years, for 10 years, at least for the last 5. And it's one that's only increasing in focus. I mean, if you really think about, like, you look at some of the UN reporting, I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but I think, in order to meet the goals for into the construction that needs to happen internationally, in order to meet our infrastructure needs over the next 20 or 30 years, you almost have to build. The reference is something like a New York City every day or something like that, or
Right.
equivalent. And if that's the case, where are you going to find the people in order to execute on that work? And so if you're really asking yourself, what are people in the industry and senior executives focused on? I think that's one of the big ones. And then the next question invariably is, how do you tackle it? So there's a few ways you can do that. One is, do more with less. And so can you leverage your technology in order to make you more efficient? Now, Procore is not going to, generate humans for you, but if it can make those humans more efficient on the job site, and it can make that time that they spend more productive, then there's a world in which we can conceivably do more with less. If we can get better visibility to schedules across multiple projects in aggregate, then we can do a better job of deploying our human capital across those projects in order to ensure the best alignment with schedule and the best use of those available resources, so that we don't have people either overworked or underworked. And I think the other one that's really interesting, and it still applies to labor, is how do we attract people to the industry? And then once they're here, how do we recruit them and how do we retain them, right? And so the attraction piece is like, what programs are we developing? How are we engaging at the grassroots level within our colleges and within our high schools in order to reduce or remove any stigmas there may still be around construction and the trades? Once they're in the industry, how do we then take them to a place where we can, bring them into a business, we can up-level them, and we can upskill them, and we can give them the tools to be successful. And then once we've done that, how do we retain them? Now, I think that final one's really important, right? How do we retain people? Mm-hmm. Because if you think about construction 5 or 10 years ago, we certainly, at least this is my belief, and I'm not sure if everyone would agree with me, but I'm not sure we were as people-focused as we are today, right? And if I look at some of the leading organizations today in construction, they're thinking day and night about how do they improve the lives of the people that work in their businesses. How do they create a platform for learning and development? How do they create a positive culture that drives performance, but also drives diversity of ideas and thought? And how do they put all that together in order to drive really massive gains from a business perspective and business outcome standpoint? I think that's the secret sauce that really helps us unlock how we use our people more effectively and how we retain them for the long term.
Yeah, I mean, I agree 100%. I mean, that's the issue, the number one issue that I continuously hear about. We have this widening dependency ratio. We have our population is mostly retiring, and there's less people coming up to maintain our infrastructure, to build our buildings, to basically do everything, right? So we're competing across industries to attract the best people to our industry, as you pointed out. And I agree with you. When I talk to executives, their concern is how do I attract the best people, how to retain the best people. And, this whole idea of creating the best workplace is really how you compete. It used to be you compete on how well you execute, and really your execution is directly tied to the people that you're able to attract and retain into your business that will do the execution. So it really does start there. But kind of like thinking about this, on the future, we're at peak labor right now. We're never going to have more people available to do the work, and it's only going to get worse. So when we think about the future and the fact that we have to continuously maintain our infrastructure, and there's such a high demand for affordable housing and other things as the population moves to urban environments, how are we going to realize this work on the job site? Like we can only do so much proactively, working and during pre-construction to perfect the work. But like thinking about the actual job site, we're going to have more automation. We're going to have more robotics. Maybe you can kind of like muse a little bit on the future of what the future of construction looks like. From your perspective, like 10 years out, how do you think buildings will be designed and built? Maybe we can talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. And let me this is the great thing about live television, if we can call it that, or live podcast or whatever. I actually just fact checked myself while I was off screen. So it's a single New York City every month for the next 40 years.
Yeah, wow.
It's sort of the equivalent for it. Was still a very big number. I said every day, but it's still a huge number. So the question is about the future, and this is the old $1 million question, I guess, the crystal ball. You kind of mentioned robotics. I'm really intrigued, to be candid, with what robotics can do and the power it can unlock on a job site. And we talked about the labor shortage, and again, we just take those two, we go hand in hand, and we've got potentially a solution, right? I mean, if you look at the sort of the initial forays into that type of technology, you've got companies like PCL and Pomelo, piloting projects with Spot the Dog from Boston Dynamics.
Yeah. Well, I heard DPR has now a position, a director of robotics. I don't know if that's true. Maybe someone can fact check me, but I just found that very interesting. They've got someone in charge of robotics for their company. I don't know what they're doing yet, but and Hilti also has a division working on robotics. So we're seeing more products come to market very quickly. I think in my mind it's going to be about augmenting labor and making them more efficient. Anyway, sorry to interrupt, but
no, I think you nailed it. I think robotics has a big part to play in the future of construction. And you know this as well as I do, Tom. 5 years ago, when I first was exposed to the construction industry, like robotics was something that folks were talking about, but I don't think they could really. There was no practical application of it that could be done at scale. And now you can apply, like you said, robots in the field to augment human labor, and it becomes a really real solution. So I can only imagine in 5 or 10 years what we'll be able to do. And then if we could, we talked about data earlier and about artificial intelligence and machine learning algorithms. If we can incorporate that type of intelligence into a robot, depending on what that robot is doing on a job site, it has the ability to respond to specific conditions, make adjustments, and make effectively decisions in real time based on the machine learning algorithms that are available to it. So I think we're only at the sort of the early stages of the amount of that level of compute power. But as we start unlocking that, I think there's a really bright future ahead for construction.
Awesome. Thank you so much for making the time to talk to us today. We really appreciate it. And best of wishes with Procore and continued success.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks for having me. We'll do it again soon. Really appreciate it.
Okay. All right. Take care.
All right, bye now.
Thanks again for joining us. Building Transformations is a non-for-profit. We're focused on delivering new technologies and innovations to ultimately improve our civilization. This organization is extremely busy. We have a number of different programs that we're managing every day, and we would love to have your participation. So please go over to cambim.com or buildingtransformations.org to get involved. You can check out everything that we're doing. Of course, tune in for our next events. We have a very active and busy schedule for the next 12 months. I also want to thank all of our supporting partners, and we have many of them that make this possible. We can't do this without you, and we really do appreciate it. And I just want to encourage everyone, of course, to subscribe, like, follow, share this content. We'd love to have you subscribing on YouTube. So if you're watching us on YouTube, please hit that subscribe button, and that way every time we publish content, you're going to get it. So thank you very much. Building Transformations is a CamBIM production hosted by me, Thomas Strong, produced by Jerry Latman, visual and graphic effects by Allison Burgess, scripting by Joseph Watson, post-production supervision by Sergey Greshko, editing by Theodore Bazaar, and visual effects and editing by Musafar Malik.